Hello everyone, welcome to Module 1, Introduction to Qualitative Analysis. So in terms of the objective, at the end of this presentation, you'll be able to recognize the main features of qualitative analysis. You'll be able to define qualitative research. You also know what constitutes qualitative data, and you'll be able to describe qualitative analysis and also differentiate between manual coding and software-aided coding. In terms of the outline, I'll be giving you brief information about qualitative research and also philosophical assumptions associated with qualitative research. And I'll be talking about qualitative analysis, trying to define qualitative analysis, and also give you a brief information about the role that you have to play as a qualitative data analyst. And also I will introduce you to some of the terms that you should know in order to be able to understand the qualitative analysis process. And I'll be talking about manual coding and the software aided coding, and I'll be giving you some things that you have to take into consideration when you are deciding whether you want to do a manual coding or you want to use a software to do the analysis. And lastly, I'll be giving you an overview of qualitative analysis process. So these are the topics that we're going to learn about, and if you have any questions, you can contact me. I'll be able to address all the questions that you may have. So let's start with qualitative research. So what is qualitative research? Qualitative research is a type of research that focuses on collecting non-numeric data to help address the research question that you have, right? So it's similar to other research, but the only difference is that you are collecting non-numeric data. So doing research, you start with identifying a specific problem, right? And based on the problem, you're going to have the purpose of the study, right? And then you think about the research questions that you want to address in the study. And then for a qualitative study, your research questions will be open-ended, right? Like, how does a person experience a specific phenomenon? So having that open-ended research question, you think about what kind of data should I use to address those questions that I have? And you may have to think about doing interviews and then collecting participant stories and experiences, and then using that information to address your research question. You can also do open-ended survey, carry out open-ended survey to get people's responses to open-ended questions. You can also do observations. You can collect documents. You can also collect journals from participants. And then you can also do focus groups. So all these data collection strategies help you to collect non-numeric data like visuals and text, audios, and videos to help you to address the research question by analyzing these kinds of data, right? So when you are constructing the purpose of the study under a qualitative study, sometimes you use the words like develop, right? Conceptualize, explain. The purpose of this study is to explain maybe anxiety among a group of people, or the purpose of the study is to compare the two cases. The purpose of this study is sometimes to understand participant experience, to explore, to give participants the chance to narrate their story or to describe a specific experience or behavior. So that is all about qualitative research. It's a type of research where you collect non-numeric data to help you to address the research question that you have. Okay, so philosophical assumptions for qualitative research. So assumptions are beliefs and ideas that should exist for your study to be credible, right? Every research tool that you use, whether you are using any qualitative research tool or quantitative research tool, there are assumptions that are associated with those tools. It's the same thing as our day-to-day life, right? When you take a specific tool and you want to use it to do a specific job, you have to know what conditions that tool could be used so that you can use it efficiently. So in qualitative research, there are specific assumptions that should be taken into consideration, should be at the back of your mind as you conduct research and also analyze your data. There are three main assumptions that you have to familiarize yourself with. The first one is believe that there is a multiple truth. This is so important because there's a belief that because you are collecting information from multiple sources, especially when you are focusing on participants who have experienced a specific phenomenon, why don't you just collect data from one participant to get to the truth? Because participant background influence their experience of a specific phenomenon. And because of that, there's a higher probability that when you interview a group of participants who have passed through the same phenomenon, who have experienced the same phenomenon like natural disaster, each of them will give their own perspective about what happened to them, right? So you can see that you're not going to get information that is the same for all participants. You get varied information. People will give you varied narration of the experience, interpretation of the experience, and their perspective of what really happened. So in doing qualitative research, you always have to think about the fact that there is always going to be multiple kind of views and perspective about the phenomenon. When you go and you are collecting data, you have to acknowledge all these diverse information that you are receiving. And at the same time too, you have to be able to gather participant background and experiences or background and knowledge that they have and the situation that they have so that you'll be better understand their views or experience that they are sharing with you, right? And the second assumption is that because you are connected to the phenomenon that you are studying, there's higher probability that your background and biases that you have and the previous knowledge might influence the phenomenon that you are studying. So it's very important as a researcher, you have to acknowledge your background. You have to be aware of your biases so that you will not unduly influence what you are studying. For example, you chose your topic. You are interested in a topic. You have some ideas about the topic. You have some feeling towards the topic. You have some connection towards the topic. The way you even construct your research question or the problem that you want to address in the study may be influenced by your background and the biases that you have. So it's very important for you to acknowledge or be aware of all these background information that might influence what you're studying. The way you ask participant questions can also be affected by your background, the way you make sense of the data that they gave you, right? So being aware of all your background and biases will help you to think about a way of putting them aside so that they will not have an undue influence on the phenomenon. So it helps you to be self-aware, right? It doesn't mean that, you're going to get a perfect result without having your background, some element of your background influencing the phenomenon. But being aware and trying to acknowledge and set them aside will help you to arrive at a very credible findings. And the last one that I want to talk about is the context. The context is very important when you are doing qualitative research. To better understand participant experience, their background, and the perspective that they have, the situation that they find themselves in, can help you to understand the experience, because as I said previously, your participant background influence what they are presenting to you, the experience. And if you are gathering participant data, you also have to gather the background information, their demographics and the research location, what the situation is, and that will help you to better understand the phenomenon, and also will help future researchers to be able to transfer your finding to similar contexts. So these are the assumptions that you have to be aware of when you are doing qualitative study, and especially when you are analyzing your qualitative data. Qualitative data analysis and your role as a qualitative analyst. So what is qualitative data analysis? It's a process of systematically reviewing the data that you have, right? And then trying to identify significant information and attach labels to those significant information, and then categorize those labels to develop themes to help you to address your research question that you have. So it involves going through your data. So let's say that you have your transcripts, right? And then so what you're doing is that with the research question in mind, you are going through the data, right? Because not all the information participants have given you is important. So it's very important for you to go through and identify what you want based on the research question. So you identify words or statements that you think is important, and then you think about, okay, what label should I give to those statements? Label is just a phrase that is representing the significant information that you have selected from the data. So you come up with phrases, and those phrases will be called codes. So those codes are then categorized to develop categories or themes, and then use those themes to help you to address your research question that you have. So that's all about data analysis. So then, what is your role as a qualitative data analyst? Your role is to just engage in data reduction, right? You are engaging in data reduction because not all of the information participant has presented to you are important or relevant to address your research question or relevant to be presented to your audience. You have to go through and systematically summarize the data and then present that information to your audience. So that summary or the theme that you have will be representing the significant information that you have collected from participants. At the same time, those themes are addressing the research question that you have, right? So you are engaged in data reduction, and then you arrive at the findings, and then you communicate the process, data analysis process, to your audience. Why should you do that? To help your audience understand how you arrive at your themes. You have to tell them every step that you took, and also the outcome under each of the steps that you took, so that they will believe what you found, and also they will understand what you found. And then it's also your role to present the findings in a meaningful manner. You are not just arriving at the themes and throwing the findings to your audience to make sense of that information. You have to think about your audience and present the information in a meaningful manner so that they understand. At the same time, you are addressing your research question that you have. So that's all about your role that you have to play. Engage in data reduction, try to arrive at a specific team findings that are addressing the research question, at the same time representing the significant information that you selected from the data that you have. You also have to show to your audience the process or how you arrive at your findings, and also present your findings in a meaningful manner. And that's your role as a qualitative data analyst. Qualitative data analysis terms. So it's very important to be aware of all these terms. It will help you in my next presentation. So the first one that you have to be aware of is relevant except. You can call it relevant information, right? So relevant except or relevant information is just a word, phrase, or sentence. It could be a paragraph that you extract from the data that you have. It's called significant information or relevant information because it will help you to address the research question that you have. So you have a specific research question, so you are going to your data based on the research question that you have. So what you are doing is that if you identify any phrase or word or statement that you think will help you to address your research question, you extract that information, right? Or you select. That information is called relevant except. And also another term that you may be using is coding, right? Coding is just a process of identifying significant information from the data and assigning label to that. That label will be called a code, right? So a code can be a phrase, and I always recommend that it should be a phrase in between 2 to 5 words, representing a specific significant information that you have identified in the data that you have, right? Coding is a process of identifying significant information. The code is an outcome of that process, where it's the label that you use to represent the phrase or word or paragraph that you have identified in the data that you have, right? And then we have code count. So the code count is just a number of significant information that has been tagged with a specific code. So there's a number of significant information that is connected to a specific code, right? You see codes as containers, right? That you go through the data and then identify significant information and then drop them, right? So that's all about the code count. So when you look into a container, you can see a container of code, right? You can see that there might be 5 significant information or 10 significant information. That will be the code count. And also we have the case count. The case count, let me simplify this for you. So assuming you have interviewed a group of participants, right? And then you have their transcript, identify significant information, and develop codes. And then, so the number of participants connected to a specific code is called case count. And then we also have categorizing. So as the name implies, you are just grouping the codes that you have to help you to address the research question that you have, right? So you are grouping the codes, right, based on the similarities, and that's called the categorization or categorizing. And the category is the outcome of the categorization or the categorizing, right? And sometimes you can go further and develop themes based on the categories that you are, especially when you have a lot of categories. You can think about what are the similarities between the categories. Can I regroup them so that I can get a concept or group of concepts or themes from it? So the themes are just concepts that emerge from maybe the codes or the categories that you have, right? And I also gave a note here saying that codes, categories, and themes are sometimes used interchangeably, right? So sometimes people can call codes themes, right? And I can even call codes categories. Normally, in a traditional way, you first develop codes and then you move on to get your categories by categorizing the code. And then you further examine the categories and then develop themes. But sometimes you may finish your analysis and you have about maybe 5 or 4 codes addressing a specific research question. Because you don't have a lot of codes that you have to do the categorization, you just can call the code themes, right? Because you don't have it a lot, right? Because the essence of you doing the categorization and develop theme is because you have a lot of codes. So let's say you have research question 1 and you have maybe 20 or 30 codes, right? You cannot present all of them to your audience. You have to group them into categories and then you can develop themes and use it to address your research question. So based on the number of codes, you could call a code theme, right? And you can even call the code a category. But in a traditional way, right, you start developing codes and then you categorize the codes to come up with categories and then you move further and develop themes based on the categories that you have. So that's all about the terms. And take note of these terms because when we start the practical application of how data is analyzed, we'll be using these terms. So just take note of them. Manual coding and software aided coding. So what is manual coding? It's just coding your data without using any qualitative software, right? So you can do it physically by maybe printing out your transcript and then using a pencil or highlighter to select significant information and then maybe use an index card, right, to write the codes that you come up with, right? And also you can do it electronically by using Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel to do the analysis. And then in this course, I'm going to show you how to use Microsoft Word to do the qualitative analysis. So these are the 2 ways of analyzing your data if you want to manually code your data. So the next one is the software aided coding. So this is where you use qualitative software to analyze your data. So the software will help you with the coding process. It doesn't really code your data for you, but it helps with the organization of the code. So when you upload your transcript or your data into the software, you'll be able to go through the transcript, identify significant information, and then you can develop codes and then you can drop the significant information into the code. So when you're using the software, the organization and the coding process becomes easy for you, right? Because sometimes most of the software, the system automatically calculates the code count and case count for you, right? But the manual coding, you have to manually count the number of significant information connected to a specific code, or the number of participants connected to a specific code. So, and also for the a software, you can do a little bit of visualization of your findings, and to help you to communicate your findings to your audience. Some of the software can help you to automatically code your data, but the outcome may have nothing to do with the research question that you have. So you have to be very careful, using automatic coding. Know what how the limitation and also the strength of using that, so that you'll be able to use it efficiently. So some of the software, they have a lot, and these are just few of them, right? We have Atlas TI, we have Deduce, we have MassQDA, NVivo, we have QDA Minor Lite. The QDA Minor Lite is free, so you can also get access to that if you want to get free software to analyze your data. So you may ask, what qualitative analysis tool should I use? Should I use manual coding tools, or should I use software-aided coding tools? It all depends. If you are new to qualitative analysis and you want to learn more about or practice qualitative analysis process or gain skills, I think starting with manual coding will be the best, right? Getting to know how to identify significant information, assign labels to them, develop themes to help you to address your research question. Getting the foundational skill before you use a software is what I will recommend. And also, if you are not willing to learn about software, then you can go ahead and use manual coding tools. If you want a system or a software too, so if you want the easier way to organize your codes and tally the codes, then I'll recommend that you use a software. If you want to visualize your data, software will be the best. If you have small amount of data, you could do a manual coding, but if you have large amount of data, then I recommend that you use a software, because it will take a long time for you to finish if you use a manual coding. Sometimes you want to connect participant demographic information to a specific codes and themes. Let's say you want to know how many males are connected to a specific theme, or what age group are connected to a specific theme. You can do that by using a software. If that's the case, you want to connect demographic information to themes that you have, then using a software will be the best. If you want to conduct auto coding, especially you have a huge amount of data and cannot manually code, then you can use a software. If you want to create a code book, so the code book is a table that contains the themes and the code that you have developed, and also some of the significant information connected to them, right? And sometimes you can also attach the meaning or the memos that you have written. So the memos are your personal reflections. So as you are analyzing the data, sometimes great idea comes into mind, and then you don't have time to think about those. So documenting them and coming back to reflect on those reflections are very important. So that will be memoing, right? Documenting your reflection. So if you want to easily explore data before coding, let's say you want to know the kinds of words participants use frequently, you can use a software to run word frequency to know the kinds of words and how many times they use those words. If you are planning to conduct less sophisticated analysis, you could use either manual coding or the software. If you have multiple data, let's say you did an interview, you did observation, you have videos, you have audios, it will be best for you to use the software. So because if you want to do it manually, it's going to take a long time for you to do, and also you have difficulty organizing all these different kinds of data that you have. So that's all that I have for you concerning deciding which tool that you have to use to do your analysis. Qualitative analysis process. So these are the steps that you can take to analyze your data. So first one, you have to prepare your data. You have to make your data ready for the analysis. Then after that, you have to develop codes, and then you categorize the codes based on the similarities, and then based on that you come up with categories and themes, and then use them to address your research questions. But sometimes you can go further to develop illustration. Sometimes you want to find out the connections between the themes, and then you can do a visual representation of the connection between the themes. And then you can also, last step is to present your findings. In this course, we're going to talk about each of these steps and provide more details and examples to help you to understand the qualitative data analysis process. So this is the end of the first module, and then this all the presentation I'm doing now is informed by my book as the step-by-step guide to qualitative data coding. It provides you a lot of information that will help you to better understand the coding process, and it has a lot of examples to provide you. If you have any questions, you can contact me. This is my personal email, info@drphilipedu.com, or you can also email the Center for Research Methods Consulting. So thank you so much for your time.